Before we get into today's video, please quickly check below to see if you've subscribed. It's totally free and allows you to never miss one of our videos. All units, alert! All units, alert! This vessel has entered real space. This vessel has entered real space. Stand by for contact with subjugation target Earth. Stand by for contact with subjugation target Earth. Alert klaxons blared on the Abraxi Authority battleship Imperious Visage, a domination vessel purpose-built for the task of turning entire planets to heel. The thousands of sapiens in its vast crew scrambled to bring their stations up to real space mode. Upon its bridge, the formidable bulk of Squadron Authoritarian Cabralian rose from his command seat. "All stations, report!" he boomed, dark red and angular head turning from side to side as he surveyed his subordinates. They were all Rexians, an insectoid species the Abraxi Authority found very useful in its vast military and civilian fleets, save for the small contingent of Raleigh Marines that stood near the rear of the bridge. The Marines' armor was black, with markings of various colors denoting their rank, and the most senior of the assembled soldiers had forewent the conventional airtight combat suit for the commanding style of military dress that befitted an officer of his station. He ran a gloved claw through his gunmetal gray feathers as Squadron Authoritarian Cabralian inspected the officers of the ship.
"Sensors report all friendly contacts accounted for. Several asteroids of irrelevant mineral wealth and 0 hostile contacts in range, Authoritarian,"
the sensors officer reported. She, like her comrades, was sealed in an operations pod that was uniquely designed for Rexian physiology. From inside the pod, which could be opened only with the proper clearance, she could use her 360-degree vision and many insectoid limbs to their fullest extent. Though many other species existed with similar abilities, most, if not all, subsumed into the expanding bulk of the Abraxi Authority, the Rexians were the first in their niche to be subjugated. No other race would ever achieve such prominence in that field.
"Weapons reports all batteries online and stable. Firing test ready to be performed at your convenience, Authoritarian."
The weapons batteries of an Abraxi Authority warship were devices of finely refined killing potential. They operated on a principle of matter conversion, changing the matter of an enemy ship's hull into energy, and changing an equal sum of their own power supply into hydrogen atoms, so as to adhere to the immutable laws of thermodynamics. The matter conversion ray was not an easy weapon to develop, nor was it a cheap weapon to fire, but any sapient unlucky enough to find themselves on the receiving end of its disintegrating beam would quickly meet an untimely end.
"All communication systems are online and stable, Authoritarian. The fleet reports fully mustered and under optimal conditions."
The Abraxi did not actually know how their interstellar communications systems worked. In fact, they did not know a great many things about the moving parts of their vast interstellar regime. In their authority's earliest days, the Abraxi people were forced by necessity to be soldiers, mechanics, and shipwrights, but as they subjugated more and more species to serve under them, the Abraxi began to assume a more commanding role. All modern Abraxi had to study were the arts of politics, statecraft, subjugation, and in the case of Squadron Authoritarian Cabralian, the command of a military force. Their authority did not quite rule the galaxy yet. There were still some pockets of resistance that were proving troublesome to stamp out. But it was men and women like Avralian that stood at the forefront of their empire's incessant expansion, commanding fleets of advanced warships and legions of enslaved soldiers, burning worlds and destroying cities whenever they deemed it necessary to fuel the expansion of the Abraxi regime.
"The Marine contingent reports all slave cadres are compliant and working, Authoritarian,"
the avian Marine commander, Contingent Master Tilvuri, barked.
"No resistance of note has been reported thus far."
His species, the Vrali, were once renowned for their music and art.
Their voices could produce songs so melodic that it was once said of Raleigh could drive even stone statues to tears. But, as the Abraxi Authority first discovered nearly a millennium ago, their talons were as sharp as their voices were sweet. Had the Vrali race fought just a little bit harder, been a little more lucky, this oppressed galaxy would have never known the shackles of Abraxi slavery. But they did not. The very first thing their wounded conquerors did, after hammering the Vrali armada over their homeworld and crushing the Vrali legions in planetary battle, was to erase every last scrap of their culture and art, and brainwash every Vrali they could into mindless, fanatical killing machines.
Understood.
Squadron Authoritarian Cabralian continued.
Set course for the third planet from this system star. If the scouting report is correct, it will contain a civilization in its early space age, ripe for conquering and molding to our will.
He turned to one of his Rexian officers. They were privileged slaves, as was Contingent Master Tilvur, but they were all slaves nonetheless. All any non-Abraxi could hope for under the Authority was a life of perpetual servitude.
Systems Lieutenant, contact the Scientific Division. I want a detailed survey of what this system's sapients have to offer us. Every species has its niche, its place in the galactic pyramid, and I expect you to see to it that these people find theirs. Are we clear?
Yes, Authoritarian! The systems lieutenant confirmed, tapping hastily on his command pod. Within seconds, a full file of the species in question had been sent to Cabralian's station. The Abraxi commander tapped a gloved claw on his command chair as he pulled up the data he had been sent.
Humans,
he mused with some fascination. It was a privilege and an honor for an Abraxi to be tasked with the subjugation of a new world. This was to be Cabralian's finest moment, the start of his little personal empire. System Authoritarian Cabralian rather suited him, he thought absent-mindedly.
Their world will be called Human A when it is subjugated.
Cabralian beckoned Contingent Master Tilvure forward with a twitch of his claw, and the grey avian hurried to his commander's side.
Your orders, Authoritarian?
He asked. Tilvure was lord of a full contingent of trained and armed Authority Marine Corps jackboots, and he lived a life of luxury that most Vrali could only dream of, but even a man like him could not properly enjoy the merits of his position. Every day of his life, save for a few special holidays and the precious moments he could spend with his loved ones, was spent in rigorous training and drilling to ensure constant readiness. The mind was a blade, the most powerful weapon in any leader's arsenal, and Tilvuri had to keep his as sharp as a powered bayonet lest he lose his rank and status to another of his kind.
What do you make of these humans?
Cabralian asked his officer, the gaze of his 4 eyes not wavering, as he commanded a hologram of one to appear before him. A 4-limbed, mostly hairless mammal flickered into existence as a 3-dimensional image about the size of Cabralian's claw. Average measurements and details about the species appeared as a scroll of text, with lines connecting them to the relevant parts of the hologram.
Your input is valued, Contingent Master. Speak.
Contingent Master Tilvuri leaned in, cautious not to encroach on his superior's personal space, and inspected the hologram.
About the size of a Vrali, good depth perception, and...
He noted that Cabralian had sent him the data package for a hologram of his own, and hastily stepped back to project it from a button on his uniform.
Their upper limbs appear adequate for throwing things, far better than many species in the Authority. I can confirm that much. If you'll ask my humble opinion, Authoritarian, I believe they'll make a formidable military species.
And you're not concerned about the threat they may pose to our conquest?
Cabralian asked, turning his face to his contingent master.
No, Authoritarian,
Tilvuri confidently answered.
Your fleet is enough to go blow for blow with modern Authority battleships. even with the outdated hulls you've been provided, and my Marines are every bit as veteran as the best of that species' military personnel. They aren't even colonizing their solar system, much less conquering the galaxy."
The contingent master ran a claw through his feathers again. Even he wasn't entirely sure why he did it.
"Barring any severely unusual events, which is to say, events that are so improbable that they shouldn't be taken into consideration anyway, you'll have no problem subjugating these people, Authoritarian. There's no threat they can pose to us."
How would you conquer them?
There was the only question Contingent Master Tilvuri had any desire to answer. He was no statesman, and neither was he a biologist. No Vrali was. His entire species, through a millennium of service, had been molded into something unrecognizable by any Vrali that called themselves free, and was at the heart the same martial race that came so painfully close to ending the Abraxi Authority's tyranny all those centuries ago. They were soldiers. Whether they were forced into such a role, or if they cracked the egg with weapon in hand, mattered little to the Abraxi autocrats whose whims they lived to serve.
"I can't say for certain without more detailed scans of the planet, but I believe the traditional subjugation doctrine would be most effective here,"
Tilvuri gladly explained.
"A species this primitive is likely to be divided among several different nations, neither of which is a match for our military force. I would find a suitable example state, a formidable military power with its fair share of enemies, and crush it with excessive force. Once the martial supremacy of the Abraxi Authority has been firmly established, I'd deliver aid to the survivors and invest in the rebuilding of the region to earn goodwill among the local populace. Enough guerrilla resistance, even from primitives such as them, can quickly make a world like this more trouble than it's worth."
Tilvuri's claws fidgeted uneasily behind him, as he wished dearly for a hologram or other visual aid to help explain his strategy.
"Once I've established the Authority as a power capable of both annihilating its enemies and empowering its allies, the traditional doctrine states that most of this world's nations would beg to be subjugated by us."
Cabralian blinked impassively at his contingent master, taking in the information he had just been given.
"Of course, that's what I'm told, at least,"
Tilvuri explained.
"I've never actually done it."
Then let this be your first,
said Cabralian.
We'll be reaching the planet soon enough. When we do, I expect you and your contingent to be ready and armed to fall upon Earth and bring that world tightly under my grip.
Tilvuri scratched his head again, casting a brief glance toward the Marines stationed at the door. He much preferred the company of his own kind, soldiers of any species, to walking on proverbial eggshells around his Abraxi overlords. Cabralian turned to look at Tilvuri.
I see greatness in you, Contingent Master Tilvuri. Great things you can do for me. Fulfill my wishes, and you'll be well rewarded.
Contingent Master Tilvuri responded to that in the only way a man of his station could. He stiffened up, straightened his spine, and offered a picture-perfect salute.
"I will try my best, Authoritarian."
I expect nothing less, said Cabralian. You're dismissed, Tilvuri. I'll need you at your best if the subjugation of Earth is to go off without a hitch.
Contingent Master Tilvuri saluted, turned around, and left the bridge.
The rest of you,
the fleet squadron Authoritarian ordered.
Continue with your duties. The relief shift will arrive shortly.
His officers, all enslaved since birth, had never left their stations. The level of psychological conditioning the Abraxi Authority imposed upon its underlings was extreme. They were taught from the very first day they could learn to serve without dissent and obey without question. Even the very concept of freedom, the very ability to make a major decision without the explicit approval of a higher authority, was foreign to them. It was for reasons precisely like this that the oppressive system of the Abraxi Authority appeared perpetually set in stone. After all, how could one fight for a cause they did not know existed? But the yearning for freedom was as natural and as indestructible as the selfish desire for power. In every echelon of the Authority's stratified society, every brick in the great Abraxi pyramid, legion after legion of soldiers stood ready to fight against their oppressors, though they had no idea they had even enlisted in the cause. Oppression could not be sustained. Tyranny was a brittle concept, prone to shattering at the slightest sign of resistance. And, whether it would take 10 years or 10 centuries, the dawn would always come to end the dark galactic night. Within days, the Abraxi Authority fleet had come close enough to Earth to perform the detailed scans of the hulking planet. Its atmosphere, if the sensors were to be believed, was primarily made up of nitrogen and oxygen. Its one natural satellite, a small and undeveloped moon, would be ideal for permanent oversight base to watch over the colonization of the world it orbited. Its nation-states, just as the scouting report had said, were still squabbling over petty differences of religion, race, and territory. Their weapons systems were so primitive when compared to the Abraxi Authority's military might that any hostile encounter Tuvalure's shock troops might have with the natives of Earth would be like throwing modern Terran armies into a war against their Neolithic ancestors. Even the most pessimistic estimates would have stated that Earth would be entirely subjugated within one local week at most, if it were not for one small thing. This world's gravity, though entirely harmless to its inhabitants, was over 3 times that of Cabralian's home. His legion's hypothetical conquest would have to be performed by soldiers whose hearts had to beat 3 times as much blood, whose muscles would have to move 3 times as much weight, and whose bones would be 3 times as prone to breaking. Squadron Authoritarian Cabralian stared at the long-range scans in horror. This was not what he had been told to expect. Something had gone horribly wrong.
"Contingent Master Tulvure,"
he snapped. There was no response. He looked about the bridge, but his Marine commander was not among the officers he saw present. He jabbed a claw at the most senior of the Marines he saw assembled.
"Bring me the Contingent Master," he demanded. "Immediately."
Within moments, Tulvure was awakened from the slumber in the communal nest he shared by his massive family. The familial bonds between Vrali had been artificially tightened by their overlords, meant to bolster their loyalty to their comrades and augment their valor and abilities in battle, and many of Tulvure's closest family members served him as lieutenants and aides in the Authority military. He loved all of his soldiers, though he would not flinch at ordering them to burn cities, and the bond he had with his ranking officers was as unbreakable as the hull of the very ship he lived on. When he received the news about Earth's high gravity, about the suffering his brave soldiers would have to endure, it was said he nearly refused to report to his master. But report he did. The mental conditioning of an Abraxi Authority slave, even one with limited freedom and the status needed to rule over others, was not easily broken.
"Squadron Authoritarian,"
he snapped, saluting as soon as he entered the bridge.
"Contingent Master Tulvure, 909,000th Abraxi Authority Marines, reporting for duty as ordered."
"Contingent Master,"
Cabralian sighed.
"Look at this."
He beckoned Tulvure forward.
3.25 Gs.
Contingent Master Tulvure looked at the data before him. There was still a short time left before the final call had to be made on how the invasion of Earth was to commence. But, if the sensor information was correct, Tulvure was unsure if his contingent would be able to perform it at all.
"The scouting report said this planet's gravity was 0.7 Gs.
Tulvure stammered, puffing up his feathers.
"What is this?"
"The scouting report,"
Cabralian sighed,
"has been tampered with. by my enemies.
He waved a claw at the sensor report.
Have you any idea how much this will set me back? The problems this will cause for my invasion?
The legions of his soldiers who would die, the legions more who would never return the same. But Cabralian did not consider those soldiers to have meaning. It was exceptionally rare for any Abraxi to care for the lives of the slaves that propped up their regime. Far less so for the overseers they placed in charge of those impoverished masses. Contingent Master Tulvuri may have been a well-respected slave, he may have been a revered slave, and he may have been a rich slave and a powerful slave, but he was still a slave. He knew the trials and plights of the soldiers under his command more than any Abraxi in the authority's hundreds of billions of worlds. He clasped his claws in front of him like a mourner as he delivered his final verdict.
Yes,
He solemnly said.
I do.
Well, that is good,
Said the squadron authoritarian.
because I have only a faint idea.
Tulvuri cocked his head, trying to conceal his great disdain for Cabralian's incompetence. He prayed he was doing well.
Would you like me to explain it to you, sir?
The contingent master asked.
I'm a specialist in military operations.
Yes, explain this.
Cabralian hastily demanded.
I am a Navy man. I've no sense for ground operations. How will this work?
Contingent Master Tulvuri ran a claw through his feathers again. He straightened out his uniform as well.
To be entirely honest, authoritarian,
He paused, picking out which was the right word to say.
there will be many logistical, tactical, and strategic difficulties with any sort of long-term occupation.
Cabralian looked at him expectantly, awaiting a report.
First and foremost, my Vrali are not going to be capable of enduring long-term deployments on Earth's surface. They were born and raised on Vrali 992, a world known for its low gravity, and trained primarily to be space marines. Space marines, as you may recall, are selected specifically from low G worlds, mainly because planets with low gravity do not produce soldiers that are adept at planet-side action. My contingent will be utterly and completely unable to execute any sort of large-scale maneuver on the planet Earth. Neither will we be able to endure any serious attempt at occupation. We will need to request reinforcements.
The gravity should not be an issue,
Cabralian stammered, unable to wrap his head around the finer points of interplanetary military strategy. This, among other things, was why he was not called Contingent Authoritarian Cabralian.
My troops have powered armor. They can lift up to 10 times their body weight. How is a threefold increase an issue?
Tulvur clicked his beak, running a claw through his feathers again. He was beginning to suspect that it may have something to do with stress.
It's not an issue of weight,
He tried to explain.
Our hearts will have to struggle 3 times as hard to pump blood. Heart attacks will ravage our forces. Our brains, at the top of our bodies, will suffer from a lack of oxygen. Strokes will cripple us. And lest I forget to mention, my soldiers are not accustomed to bearing 3 times the weight with every muscle in their bodies. Pulled muscles, broken bones, and a general malaise among the men will clip this contingent's proverbial wings.
Cabralian, for all his officers' valiant efforts, looked positively unconvinced.
Authoritarian, with all due respect, my men will be utterly unable to function outside of their powered gear. This isn't like a gravity simulation, Jim, where you up the G's when you are exercising. This is a real, legitimate, massive planet that will pose a real, legitimate, massive health risk to any low-G space marine who is deployed to its surface. Our soldiers will suffer. Our soldiers will die. Our equipment will falter and fail in this high gravity. And all of this just to avoid a call to the nearest high-gravity military world? It seems a bit, well, not absurd, but...
He fumbled with the word. Cabralian chose this moment to interject, smashing to bits any chance Tilvuri might have had to dictate the conversation.
Bring up the issues we will have with our equipment,
Cabralian demanded in a faintly derisive tone.
I don't mean to insult your expertise on the matter of ground conflict, Contingent Master, but it seems to me that you are looking at a pebble and seeing it as a boulder. We are, after all, the Abraxi Authority. We have conquered far more formidable foes than primitive humans.
I have not even mentioned the humans,
Tilvuri shot back.
Every issue my contingent will face on that world is purely a result of the world itself. Its nature is tameable, its inhabitants can be easily beaten, but its gravity is a law of the universe as immutable as entropy itself. When mortals go up against the universe will always win. We can't possibly hope to occupy Earth on our own, Authoritarian.
You don't understand,
Cabralian said as he took a step back from his contingent master. He looked at his contingent master with a new sense of knowledge, regarding him in the same way that a welder might look at a garden shovel, as a useful tool, ideal for one purpose, but entirely unhelpful in the current scenario. Military men were never meant for politics.
I am on my own,
Cabralian explained.
I am not a popular man. I am alone, without true allies to depend on. I have many enemies in this sector of authority space, many men and women who have something to gain from seeing me brought low or killed, and I have not been very proactive in finding people who have a vested interest in seeing me succeed.
He waved a claw toward a hologram of Earth.
You have to face the facts, Contingent Master. I have been set up to fail. The resources I have with me are everything that I could muster up. Your contingent of Marines is the only unit I have that will be capable of occupying Earth. Now tell me, Tilvuri, how will you make this happen?
Contingent Master Tilvuri cast a sideways glance at the hologram. The assault force that Cabralian had assembled, a middling fleet of obsolete warships, and their pitiful interstellar marine contingents, was already scraping the barrel when it came to the fighting forces of the Abraxi Authority. They did not even have tanks or heavy walkers, and the repulsion craft they meant to rely upon as ground-based armor on Earth would be only 1/3 as effective as Tilvuri had planned for. The troop transports would be able to ferry 1/3 of their traditional complement. The gunships could only carry 1/3 of their total munitions, and their fuel would last them only 1/3 of the expected time. Truth be told, Tilvuri did not see a way Cabralian could defeat Earth's combined armies in battle without doing enough damage to ruin the very world he came for in the first place. His ground forces numbered in the low hundreds of thousands. The human planet, primitive as it was, could muster 100 million soldiers within weeks if its rulers ever felt the need. Under the expected conditions, such a numerical disadvantage was not insurmountable, but the expected conditions included a battlefront where the gravity would be 30% less than that of Cabralian's homeworld. A 3-fold increase was, as one may expect, a formidable deviation from the norm. Tilvuri steadied his nerves. With a great act of will, he forced himself to speak the words. He was a soldier. His duty was first to his superior, second to those he commanded. To lie to Squadron Authoritarian Cabralian benefited nobody but himself.
I do not see a way to conquer Earth with military force, Authoritarian,
he admitted. He stared at his commanding officer like a mistreated dog waiting to be struck.
Please, forgive me for my failure.
I forgive you,
Cabralian assured him.
You have always served me to the best of your abilities. I have no right to expect more than that.
Even among his enslaving, despotic kind, there was yet warmth. In the distant future, when the Abraxia Authority would finally be crushed under its own bloated weight, it would not be impossible to find those of the same race as Cabralian working to make a future free of its grip. But that future was so far distant as to be irrelevant. Only the present mattered here, and at present, acts of kindness from the Abraxi were few and far between.
You're dismissed, Contingent Master.
Cabralian gestured toward the door.
Give me some time alone to think.
Tilvure saluted.
Yes, Authoritarian.
He turned around and left the bridge.
Authoritarian,
a voice in a command pod asked.
Squadron Authoritarian, am I to adjust course?
It was the navigator of Cabralian's colossal flagship. For a moment, Cabralian did not respond.
Squadron Authoritarian,
the Rexian officer asked.
What are my orders, Authoritarian?
Cabralian thought for a moment.
Continue on course,
he finally decided.
The invasion will have to proceed as planned.
Squadron Authoritarian?
A second officer asked. He was the ship's internal liaison, a communications officer tasked with managing all intra-ship affairs. He and the external liaison, whose duty it was to liaise with the fleet, were the two most critical officers a ship captain had at their disposal.
Shall I alert Contingent Master Tilvure to prepare his troops?
Cabralian turned to face his liaison.
There's no need for that,
he commanded.
I don't expect a Vrali to understand the intricacies of politics.
If the Vrali Marines at the back of the bridge had opinions about their commander's supremacist ideals, they were wise enough to see fit not to voice them.
He'll fall in line when he has to, same as any of his race. We don't indoctrinate them to disobey orders.
Tilvure, in the meantime, was pacing about the deck of his transport pod. It was common practice for an Abraxi Authority warship to be divided into sections, each one dedicated to a system such as the heavy guns, or the light guns, or the shields or life support, both for ease of assembly and the security of the ship. If the slaves in one section rebelled, which was itself nigh unheard of, the command crew could shut it down and isolate it from the rest of the warship until such a time as the Marines could restore the Authority's brutal hierarchy within it. Transport pods such as the one Tilvure rode alone were the only way for crew and supplies to move from section to section aboard ship. Before he could reach his quarters, however, his pod was abruptly called back.
Transport pod, he barked. Report!
There was no answer.
Report,
he said again. He received only silence. Finally, he pulled up the pod's data manually. It was heading back to the bridge.
Contact Squadron Authoritarian Cabralian,
he demanded. He received no reply. What his commander wanted of him remained to be seen. Soon enough, he was back on the bridge of the battleship Imperious Visage.
Squadron Commander,
he snapped, stepping through the great blast doors at its rear and saluting Cabralian as he entered.
I was ordered to report back to the bridge. Was it a mechanical malfunction?
He did not want to spend any more time on that man's command deck than was necessary.
No, Contingent Master, it was not.
Cabralian turned to face his officer.
You are going to prepare a battle plan for the invasion of Earth.
For a moment, Tilvure was silent.
Authoritarian?
He finally asked.
I've already confirmed that an invasion of Earth is impossible. I thought I made this clear.
You've made your opinion very clear, said Cabralian. But necessity demands I try anyway. It is not a fitting fate for an Abraxi to be consigned to poverty and ignominy, with neither subjects to rule over nor power to wield. And your purpose, lest you forget, is to bring me as much power and as many subjects as your legions may conquer."
He stood tall and proud, nearly a head taller than his avian marine commander, and proclaimed his demands.
"I will have Earth, or I will have nothing, and I will not have nothing."
You will have your fleet and your marine squadron, authoritarian,
Tulvuri stammered out.
This is not nothing. Please, authoritarian, reconsider this course of action.
"I have considered it. This is the only way for me. You will obey my command, Contingent Master."
Cabralian pointed at Tulvuri, speaking forcefully.
"Give me Earth. I don't care how many of your soldiers die in the process."
I do!
For a moment, Tulvuri wasn't even aware he had spoken the words. Neither was he aware that his right claw was tightening its grip on the holster of his energy pistol.
What I mean to say, authoritarian, is that it would be inefficient to waste space marines in fighting on a high-G world,
he hastily explained.
It would be like putting a round peg through a square hole. Not a good use of the Abraxi Authority's resources.
"I am not the Abraxi Authority,"
Cabralian bellowed, slamming his fist into his other palm. Were his Rexian officers less disciplined, they might have stopped to watch his outburst.
"I demand obedience, Tulvuri. I have a round peg, and I have a square hole, and if I do not fit my peg through it, I will suffer. You serve me, Contingent Master. I demand compliance, or you will be punished."
At this, Tulvuri hesitated. He was not ready to send his men to die in a war they could not win. Neither was he ready to see valuable factories and working-aged populations reduced to energy by the heavy batteries of the imperious visage. The Abraxi Authority had the tools to conquer this world without him, without this needless sacrifice. How could Cabralian be so selfish as to demand the impossible of his men, all so he could receive the glory of victory? But he had to comply. Non-compliance was treason. Treason was death. He had not come so far only to die here.
"Well, Contingent Master,"
Cabralian sneered,
"will you obey, or will you face the punishment for disobedience?"
Every word he spoke dripped with contempt for Tulvuri and his marines. He was a politician, a statesman. He had never seen the light leave a soldier's eyes. Abraxi were too sheltered to know the truth of such things. Tulvuri realized now he had a tight grip on his pistol. He felt confident that he could draw it quicker than anyone else on the bridge. But those thoughts were treasonous. He had to suppress them.
Authoritarian, please, I beg of you."
"You are of Raleigh,"
said Cabralian.
"You do not beg, you obey. You do as your superior demands. You will command my contingent, and you will conquer my world."
"My contingent,"
Tulvuri corrected him, for once allowing his true feelings to seep into his words. It felt like finally leaving a 10G gravity field.
"What?"
Cabralian had never seen such disgust in the eyes of his contingent master. He had never pushed Tulvuri to the brink, had never realized that there were limits to the conditioning that had been imposed upon him. And now he would not have a chance to.
"It's my contingent,"
Contingent Master Tulvuri said firmly, as he pulled his energy pistol from his holster. The Marines behind him responded too slowly. By the time they had their own weapons raised, Tulvuri had his firearm leveled directly at Cabralian's chest. The safety was off. The weapon was loaded. A brief squeeze of the trigger was all it took to vaporize Cabralian's upper body.
"Not yours."
Alarms began to sound. Tulvuri's own Marines, realizing his intentions too late, leveled their energy rifles at him. He did not even have time to comprehend the enormity of what he had done before another plasma discharge struck him dead where he stood. Had he lived, he might have felt some sense of morbid pride in his men, or shame at what he had done, or any emotion, really. But what mattered was not that he was dead. It was that his contingent would live. The Abraxi fleet was leaderless, without reason to invade Earth. Within hours of Cabralin's execution at the hands of his contingent master, his fleet would begin to depart, never to return to Earth again. Centuries after this momentous event, when the shackles of the authority would be finally broken, Contingent Master Tilvuri's name would be dredged up from the dustbin of history and honored by the galaxy for what he had done here. Liberated Vrali soldiers and street sweepers and artists alike would chant his name in reverence for his deeds. It would be said for centuries more that Contingent Master Tilvuri, though he had worn the shackles of a slave all his life, was the first of his species to ever die free.
I hope you enjoyed that story. Click right here to watch another video with the same characters.